At WFM Labs, our organization recognizes the importance of gaining market insights to compete effectively and provide better goods and services to our customers. However, exchanging price or commercially sensitive information with competitors can violate antitrust laws and harm competition. To avoid antitrust risk, it is essential to ensure that information exchanges in the WFM Labs community are reasonable and promote competition. This includes avoiding discussions or coordination of sensitive topics such as customer prices, pricing paid to vendors, compensation paid to employees, or proprietary information. If you would like more information, please refer to the guidelines outlined by the FTC and DOJ, Antitrust Guidelines for Collaborations Among Competitors. In addition, WFM Labs meetings are being recorded. By continuing to be in the meeting, you are consenting to be recorded. And finally, we ask that all participants review and comply with our Code of Conduct. Thank you.
Hi, it's Ted Lango, founder of WFM Labs, bringing you episode number 7, the high cost of attrition. We're going to double click today into the speed to proficiency and show you some of those calculations. These calculations can be a little bit tricky. We're going to give you a insight into how we incorporated speed to proficiency, how we monetized it, and how we incorporated it into our cost of attrition calculators. We're going to share a model that you can use yourself to sort of test out how this works. I'm going to demonstrate it today and then share the model with everybody in the community here. If you're new to WFM Labs, we're an organization formed by workforce management and contact center professionals. We're looking to invent the next generation of workforce management practices that will allow contact centers to operate more effectively in the future. We're coming up to April 13th, where we'll be hosting a session on the high cost of attrition. We'll be diving deeper into something we exposed in episode 5, a dynamic attrition calculator. And today, I essentially want to take just a piece of that dynamic calculator and show you how we get to some of the math behind the costs involved in speed to proficiency. If you haven't watched, I'd encourage you to take a look at episode 5. We talk about the cost of attrition, sort of the simple math behind what's behind the cost of attrition, but then we really expose the fact that there's a lot of other costs involved. The cost of recruiting, the cost basically to onboard people, and in training, there's a number of costs aside from just normal training attrition, the actual time that people spend off the phone while they're being trained. And then at the end of the day, what I'm going to go through today is this last piece, and nesting and proficiency, and really how to monetize the speed to proficiency. I'm going to demonstrate an Excel version of this. We're using Excel. You can use RStudio. You can come up with your own methods for calculating this, but we thought it'd be useful to expose how we get to these numbers behind the speed to proficiency. It's the speed to proficiency that really ends up driving our new hire costs a lot higher than a lot of people understand. In episode 5, we showed you the dynamic attrition calculator itself, how to basically calculate a base workload from work hours, annual calls, tenured AHT, shrinkage, and occupancy. And then we exposed the turnover factors that go into the costs, the annual attrition, training length, training attrition, speed to proficiency, your handle time curve, salary, and onboarding costs. The calculator then allows you to expose not just your training costs here in the bottom left-hand corner, but the onboarding costs and the speed to proficiency costs. And on today's session, I want to show you a little bit of a hack using Excel in terms of how we get to these numbers themselves. We'll share this sheet with you, and then you can leverage it as well to test it out in your environment to monetize these speed to proficiency costs. I give full credit to a new member of our community, James McMahon. He came up with this model a number of years ago. I loved it. I thought it simplified how we can, at a high level, really monetize speed to proficiency. So I'm going to go into a spreadsheet here and just work through the calculations and understand exactly how we're able to price out speed to proficiency. Okay, so in order to demonstrate how we come up with this speed to proficiency calculation here, I'm going to use a spreadsheet. I like to start off explaining these concepts with spreadsheets. Everyone's got access to Excel. That doesn't mean that you have to use Excel at the end of the day. You can take these concepts and program them into your own programming language, into our studio, whatever suits your needs. But we think Excel is just a good way to go and expose the logic behind how we're building this cost out. So what I'm going to do first is just build a kind of a top-down calculation of headcount required based on 5 inputs into our work. How many work hours we do annually? We'll just say 2,080. I'm going to work with a group that takes 10 million calls annually. Handle time, we'll put in 443 seconds and 32% shrink, 87% occupancy. And then what we want to get to is a required FTE. In order to get to this required FTE, I'm using a straightforward calculation of annual calls times handle time. We turn it into hours and then divide by the work hours, divide by occupancy, and divide by 1 minus shrink. So this formula right here is simply, again, annual calls times handle time, which will give us our workload. I've expressed it in seconds. So by dividing by 3,600, we're taking it to hours. Then we're dividing it by the total work hours over that period of time. And then we're inflating the head count based on our lost time, occupancy, dividing by occupancy, dividing by 1 minus shrink. This is a fairly standard calculation that a number of my colleagues and others have used throughout the industry if we just want to calculate the required minimum headcount to service a specific workload. This doesn't mean this is the staff you need. In fact, if you built a budget with just 1,000 heads, you'd be woefully understaffed because you're not accounting for attrition. So as a next step, we're going to account for at a high level our attrition. So I put in an attrition percentage and then calculate the number of FTEs. So we're just going to work with 40% attrition, meaning very simply, if we have 1,000 agents and 40% attrit, we're going to have to replace 400 people. In the third section, I'm going to put in 2 other factors to start to work on how we actually price out speed to proficiency. We know when we hire new people that they're not as effective as tenured agents, and they take some amount of time to become proficient. In my example, I'm going to suppose that they take 6 months to become as proficient as a tenured agent. They also start at a higher handle time than tenured agents. For demonstration period purposes, I'm going to use an example that a new hire starts out twice as long as a tenured agent in the way they handle calls, and they take 6 months before they get down to the same handle time as a tenured agent. I'm then going to build out a section where we're going to expose what that handle time looks like over the period of time that they're getting up to speed. So right here in this section, I'm basically saying month 1, month 2, month 3, and so on until they get up to 12 months. And then we're going to put, just to keep our eyes on, what the tenured speed is. And then the first calculation we're going to do is essentially this in cell J7. We're going to look at how proficient they are on month 1 compared to the new hire. Now this calculation here looks a little complicated, but really all it is 1 divided by the AHT on day 1. So effectively, if someone takes 2 times as long on day 1, they're only 50% proficient. Their handle time, thus, is going to be simply tenured handle time divided by the proficiency. So we see here on new hires on day 1, if a tenured handle time is 443 and they take twice as long on day 1, the new hires handle time is 886. The next step we want to go down is we want to figure out a proficiency factor. This factor essentially is now looking at how quickly they will become proficient so that we can add this number in each month until they're fully proficient at month 6. So to determine this proficiency factor, we simply are dividing 1 minus the proficiency factor divided by the months that they take to become proficient. So 1 minus 50% proficient is 50%. And then we divide that remaining 50% up divided by the number of months that they take to become proficient. What this is effectively saying is they're going to improve their proficiency by 8% each month until they become as proficient as a tenured agent. In order to build out the rest of the graph, we've got one additional formula that we're putting in right below this initial formula here in the proficiency column. Remember here, I'm just taking 1 minus or 1 divided by the AHT proficiency factor. But then each of these remaining cells, I'm effectively adding in this proficiency factor to the remainder cell. Again, this looks complicated, but really this first section is just saying, if we're less than 1, then go ahead and add 8% onto the 50%. So we go from 50 to 58 to 67 to 75 to 83 to 92 until on month 7, they're fully proficient, operating at 100%. The next step is to basically now go and average these numbers out. This is effectively an average of the new hires handle time. The average of a tenured handle time is simply the tenured handle time, 443. And over here, we can average out the proficiency of the new hires compared to the tenured agents. So over the course of a whole year, they're effectively 85% as efficient as a tenured agent when looked at over the course of the year. We can then calculate the adjusted average handle time. And here to do so, we're simply weighting out what percentage of agents are new hires against the tenured staff over time. So we end up with effectively, instead of 443, we effectively have a average handle time for the full year adjusted of 473. And this is why attrition costs the money that it does. We all know how just a few seconds of handle time can drop big benefits to the bottom line. Well, new hires aren't as efficient as the tenured agents, and hence when we lose an agent, we can't just hire one agent to replace them, we have to hire more. That brings us to our last factor, is when we're going to replace 400 agents, how many do we really need to hire? And effectively, that simply is the 400 agents divided by how efficient they are over the course of the year. Given that they're only 85% efficient, in order for us to service the workload with the new hires, we effectively have to replace 468 headcount instead of 400 to generate the same capacity that's generated by tenured agents. And that's what then allows us to effectively monetize the proficiency cost itself. The difference between the FTEs that we need to replace and with the speed of proficiency versus the FTEs that we would have to replace if they were as efficient as tenured agents, in this particular case, is an extra 68 headcount. So when you go and you look at our cost calculator here, and we use these same types of numbers, 10 million calls, 443 seconds, 32%, 87% shrink, and we start to look at our annual attrition, how many months it takes to become proficient, and the speed to proficiency, we're basically calculating this value over here in that same exact way. We're looking at the true training costs. We're looking at onboarding costs based on your other inputs here. But speed to proficiency is simply going and leveraging this same methodology here to understand just how many agents at our price is it taking to effectively service the workload that's being represented up here. 1,000 agents. I actually need a budget for 1,176 agents. And down here we show how the speed to proficiency in this particular case makes up 33% of the total costs of turnover. So we wanted to share that with you and offer up the Excel spreadsheet. I'll put a link in the post for the spreadsheet so you can play with it yourself. We're curious if you've got feedback on it. We're coming up to our session on April 13th. I'd encourage you to join. This is one little section that we're diving into, the cost of speed to proficiency. We'll also expose the rest of the dynamics behind the calculator itself, and look forward to obtaining your feedback on whether this is useful. We think there are big challenges in communicating the true cost of attrition, and by enabling you to have access to these tools and the methodology, we hope to be able to change the conversation to really expose the high costs of employee attrition. If you're watching this video and you're not in the community today, come on over to WFM Labs and click join, wfmlabs.org, and click join. You're welcome to access this file as well and give it a try for your own environment. Look forward to hearing any feedback. Feel free to post any comments, and join us on Thursday, April 13th, as we dive into this topic a little bit deeper in our next workshop. Thank you.